The dining room was dressed like a scene from a magazine, candles flickering in their holders, fresh white flowers blooming in crystal vases, and a roast resting in the oven, its aroma teasing the air with promise. Loretta Patterson stood by the window in her navy blue dress, tracing the outline of each pearl button down her front. The dress wasn't new, but it was special. Elliot, her son, had once said she looked like royalty in it. Tonight she needed to feel like that again. She'd spent 3 weeks preparing for this night, her 65th birthday. It wasn't just a meal. It was a celebration of a life lived in full color, of being a mother, a sister, a grandmother, and above all, a woman who never gave up on love, even when love didn't return the favor. The table was set for 8. 8 people she loved. 8 places carefully arranged, each with a name card written in her delicate handwriting. There was Elliot, her only son, Meadow, his wife, their 2 children, Tommy and Emma, her sister Ruth and Ruth's husband, Carl, and of course, Loretta herself at the head of the table. The placement was symbolic. She wanted to see all their faces to drink in their laughter. But the clock ticked past 6:30, then 6:45. Loretta kept checking her phone. Maybe she got the time wrong. Maybe someone had a flat tire. Maybe life, as it often does, got in the way. At 7 hour she called Elliot. Straight to voicemail. She called Meadow. Voicemail again. Ruth didn't answer either. At first it felt like confusion, then concern, then a cold, creeping realization no one was coming. This wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. When her phone buzzed again, Loretta's heart leapt. Maybe an apology, maybe a change of plans. But it was a social media notification, a photo. The family, on a cruise ship, all of them, champagne in hand, sun-kissed smiles. Even Ruth, on her birthday. Her body went still, the kind of stillness that comes not from peace, but from shock. A full-body pause when the heart breaks quietly and all at once. Why didn't they tell her? How long had this been planned? She felt the sting of betrayal, not just in the absence of her family, but in the joy they shared without her. And then something sharper pierced through it all. She had been erased. It wasn't the first time Meadow had made her feel small, like a guest in her own family. Loretta had often brushed it off, giving Meadow the benefit of the doubt, convincing herself it was unintentional, miscommunication, misunderstanding. But tonight proved otherwise. There's a special kind of grief in watching your family celebrate together, while you eat alone. She sat down at the head of the table, the candles flickering down to stumps. Her roast was cold, her chocolate cake untouched. Everything she had poured her heart into was still perfect except for the absence it surrounded. Yet as she sat in that silence, another voice emerged inside her, a stronger one. You are not invisible. You are not forgotten. You are not gone. She whispered it aloud like a mantra. For 65 years, Loretta had been the glue, the peacekeeper, the problem solver, the quiet strength. Maybe too quiet. Tonight changed everything. She took a deep breath and began to clear the table, not in defeat, but in clarity. Her story wasn't over, and no one, not Meadow, not silence, not exclusion, would write her out of it. The next morning, Loretta woke up to a house that felt heavier than usual. It wasn't the walls or the furniture. It was the silence. A silence thick with rejection and unanswered questions. She stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching the street where no one had come the night before. A neighbor walked his dog, waving politely. Loretta smiled automatically, as she always did. But behind that smile was the sting of a new realization. Her family hadn't simply forgotten her. They had moved on without her. The betrayal sat like a stone in her chest. But more than that, it made her think. How did things get this far? How did she go from family matriarch to ghost in the background? She pulled out her phone and scrolled through Meadow's posts. Photos from the cruise flooded her feed. Elliot sipping wine, the children dancing on the deck. Ruth with a cocktail in hand. All glowing. All happy. And none of them had called her. Not a message. Not even a text excuse. The pain twisted again, but this time it brought clarity. This wasn't spontaneous. This was strategy, and it wasn't new. She remembered the moment it had first felt off. It was at Tommy's 4th birthday party 2 years ago. She'd shown up excited, holding a gift wrapped in superhero paper. Meadow had met her at the door with a confused expression and a quick apology. "Oh, Loretta, didn't Elliot tell you? We moved the party to tomorrow, but through the glass she could see the balloons, the cake, and the children playing." She'd smiled politely and walked away, heart aching. Elliot had seemed genuinely puzzled when she called later. "No, Mom, the party was definitely today." "I thought you couldn't make it." It hadn't made sense then, but now it did. This was a pattern of exclusion dressed up as miscommunication. Loretta had been edited out of her own family story, one event at a time. Birthdays, she was told, were rescheduled dinners that were forgotten playdates, that slipped minds. And all the while she had blamed herself. Maybe she'd been too overbearing, too old-fashioned, too present. But now she saw the truth. Meadow was methodically making her invisible. What struck Loretta most was that no one else seemed to notice. Or if they did, they said nothing. Not even Ruth. Her own sister had boarded that cruise and toasted champagne on her birthday and hadn't thought twice. The weight of that silence crushed her more than the lies ever could. So she made a decision. She wasn't going to beg for their attention anymore. She wasn't going to force smiles or send follow-up messages. If she was going to be written out, she would pick up the pen and start writing her own pages again. That afternoon she visited the library, a place she hadn't returned to since retiring. She sat by the large glass windows with a stack of journals and a hot cup of chamomile tea. She started to write. Not just what had happened, but how it made her feel, how it rewired her sense of worth, how it reminded her that life isn't over at 65, that being excluded doesn't mean being erased. And as she wrote, something stirred inside her, a quiet defiance, a recognition that her story mattered, that she mattered. It was time to stop standing behind the window. 3 days had passed since the birthday that never was. Loretta had returned to her quiet routines, morning coffee, tending to her garden, evening journaling sessions by the window. But there was a new edge to everything now. Her solitude wasn't peaceful anymore. It was charged with unspoken grief, betrayal, and the beginnings of defiance. That Tuesday morning, just as the kettle started to whistle, the doorbell rang. Loretta froze. She wasn't expecting anyone. These days, visits were rare. Her hand trembled slightly as she placed the mug down and walked toward the door. Through the peephole, she saw a man in his 40s, tired eyes, wrinkled coat, a nervous energy about him. Her instinct told her something wasn't right. Still, she opened the door just barely. The chain was still latched. "Mrs. Patterson?" he asked, voice low. "My name's David. This is going to sound insane, but I think my son might be living in your son's house." The words hit like a slap. Loretta blinked. "I'm sorry, what his name is Tommy. 7 years old. Brown hair. Scar on his chin from a bike fall when he was 4. Loretta's breath caught in her throat. Her grandson Tommy did have that exact scar. But that didn't mean... David continued, eyes pleading. "I know this is a lot, but please, I'm not crazy. I've been looking for my son for over 2 years. Loretta's world tilted slightly. He explained that his partner Margaret had left suddenly one day, took the child and vanished without a trace. No messages, no forwarding address, just empty drawers and silence. He'd reported her missing, hired a private investigator, posted on every platform he could think of. Nothing. Until recently. "I found her photo, your daughter-in-law," he said, showing Loretta his phone. There she was. Meadow. But David didn't call her Meadow. He called her Margaret Winters. Same smile, same woman. Loretta gripped the doorframe to steady herself. David went on. "She's done this before. Finds someone, gets close fast, isolates him from his friends and family, then disappears, usually after getting married or having a child. I don't want to take Tommy away from everything he knows, but I can't stand by while she keeps building a life on lies." Loretta could barely speak. Her mind replayed every strange moment, every time Meadow redirected the children away from her, every sudden change in plans, every event that mysteriously excluded her. It had all been part of something bigger. She thought she'd just been pushed aside, but now it looked like she'd been silenced on purpose. Because someone like her, someone who paid attention, who cared, who was present, might have noticed the truth. "You're telling me," Loretta said slowly, "that Tommy might not be my son's child." David handed her an envelope. "I had a DNA test done. I've been tracking them for a while." "I'm sorry." Loretta opened it. Her fingers trembling. There in sterile black ink, it read 99. 7% probability of paternity. David Walker. Her legs nearly gave out. She looked up at David, eyes wide, heart pounding. If this was true, then Meadow Margaret had deceived them all. And Elliot. Sweet, trusting Elliot had no idea. Loretta suddenly saw the past 7 years through a new lens. Everything she thought was coldness or distance was in fact manipulation. She hadn't just lost her place in the family, she'd been removed by design. Loretta sat alone that night in the armchair near the fireplace, the DNA report resting on her lap, like a weight made of truth. Outside, the wind shook the trees and scattered the dead leaves that had begun to pile along the sidewalk. But inside, everything was still too still. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. Instead, she reviewed the past 7 years like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle she'd been trying to force into place. Now suddenly the image was clear, and it chilled her. She thought back to the beginning. When Meadow first entered Elliot's life, she was warm, funny, a bit mysterious. A whirlwind romance followed. They were married within 6 months. At the time, Loretta was happy. Elliot had always been a bit too trusting, a little too soft-hearted, and Meadow seemed to invigorate him, but something had always felt off. It started subtly. Their Sunday dinners, once a cherished routine, slowly became sporadic. First, Meadow was too tired, then too busy, and finally Elliot stopped scheduling them all together. When Loretta would call, Meadow often answered and told her Elliot was unavailable. "He's napping," she'd say, or "he had a tough week." Always gentle, always polite. But over time, Elliot's voice on the line became less frequent. He went from calling twice a week to once every few weeks, then only when Loretta called first. She blamed the kids. Parenthood is exhausting. She excused it all. But now she knew Meadow had orchestrated the separation. Loretta's role had been gradually carefully reduced. Birthdays, holidays, school events, she was often given the wrong date or told last minute that something had changed. The disappointment had always come with plausible explanations, and Loretta, eager to be kind to avoid conflict, had never pressed. But what if that kindness had enabled this erasure? She remembered how at Emma's kindergarten recital, she'd arrived early, only to discover it had taken place the day before. "Oh, we thought you got the updated flyer," Meadow had said with that perfectly rehearsed sympathy. Loretta had smiled again, but now with David's words echoing in her ears and the DNA paper crumpled slightly in her hand, everything looked different. Meadow had built a story, and erased the characters she didn't like. And Elliot, sweet Elliot, had believed her. Why wouldn't he? He'd always trusted people. It was one of his most beautiful qualities, and it turned out one of his greatest vulnerabilities. Loretta sighed. Even Ruth, her own sister, had gone silent lately. Calls went unanswered, texts left unread, and then seeing her on that cruise holding champagne with the same woman who had exiled Loretta, it felt like betrayal, layered atop betrayal. But this wasn't just about exclusion anymore. This was deception. This was manipulation. This was damage. And it wasn't just about Loretta. It was about Elliot, about Tommy, about a child being raised in a house built on lies. She couldn't stay silent anymore. Loretta stood up, the report still in hand. She walked to her writing desk and opened a drawer. Inside was a leather-bound journal nearly full. But tonight, instead of writing, she retrieved an envelope and began crafting a letter. Not to Elliot, not yet. To herself. It began. You were not wrong. You were not paranoid. You were being erased. But now, you are waking up. She wrote long into the night, not because she needed the words to remember, but because she needed to believe herself again. The next morning she'd call Elliot, and this time she wouldn't let Meadow answer. Loretta held the phone in her hand for nearly 15 minutes before dialing. She stared at Elliot's contact photo, one she had taken years ago on a park bench, his arm around little Tommy, both of them mid-laugh. The image used to bring her comfort. Now it stung. Still she pressed call. Hi, Mom, Elliot answered almost instantly, his voice warm. Didn't expect to hear from you so early. Loretta's throat tightened. Good morning, sweetheart. I wanted to hear your voice. There was a pause. Is everything okay? He asked, a subtle shift in tone. You sound off. How do you explain to your son that his life might be built on a lie, that his child might not be his, that the woman he trusts more than anyone may have rewritten his reality? She couldn't. Not yet. So Loretta smiled through her words, even though he couldn't see. I've been thinking about everything, about family, about time. Elliot chuckled nervously. Is this about the birthday dinner, Mom? I'm really sorry. Meadow said we were going to make it up to you. Loretta cut in gently, but firmly. Don't apologize. I'm not angry. Another pause. She could hear him relax slightly. I just think, she continued, that we should have dinner. Just us. This weekend if you're free. Elliot hesitated. Just us as in? Me and you and Tommy, of course, she added quickly. Maybe Emma, too. Nothing fancy. I'll cook. He sighed. Let me check with Meadow. Loretta bit her lip. That phrase again. Always Meadow. Always asking permission. Of course, she said. Let me know. 2 hours later, he called back. Saturday at 6 works. She's fine with it. The way he said she's fine with it didn't sit right. It sounded like a decision Meadow had granted, not one Elliot had made himself. Still, Loretta thanked him and told him she was excited. But inside she was preparing. She reopened the envelope from David. She reread every word, every statistic, every number. She pulled out the investigator's report, 2 copies of marriage licenses, old addresses, aliases. It read like a novel, a disturbing one. And Elliot had no idea. She imagined telling him everything. Would he believe her? Would he defend Meadow? Would he accuse her of trying to tear the family apart? Or worse, would he already suspect, but be too afraid to face the truth? Loretta spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning. She washed her good china, the same set she had laid out for her birthday dinner 2 weeks ago. Ironic. The plates no one had touched would finally be used. As she folded linen napkins, her hand trembled, not out of fear, but resolve. If Meadow had built a lie, then Loretta would shine a light on it. Not with rage, not with revenge, but with truth. Because Elliot deserved to know the reality of the life he was living. Because Tommy deserved to be loved for who he truly was not, as a pawn in someone else's plan. And because Loretta deserved to stop being invisible. Saturday arrived with an eerie stillness. Loretta woke up before sunrise, her mind buzzing with every word she'd rehearsed in her head all week. This wasn't just a dinner, it was a reckoning. She didn't know how the night would end, but she knew she was done living in the shadows. She cleaned the house with the energy of someone preparing for a performance. Every dish polished, every floor wiped twice. She wore the same navy blue dress from her birthday, an intentional choice. This time, she wouldn't be forgotten in it. By 5:30, the table was set. Good china, crystal glasses, cloth napkins folded into soft triangles. And in the center of it all, a simple manila envelope sat beside her teacup, its contents more powerful than any meal she could prepare. At 6:00 sharp, the doorbell rang. Loretta inhaled deeply before opening the door. Elliot was first holding Tommy's hand. Meadow followed, radiant in a cream-colored dress, her smile as polished as ever. She moved like someone who had never been caught, never questioned. Grandma Tommy shouted, rushing in with unfiltered excitement. "Guess what? I built a robot out of cereal boxes." Loretta knelt and hugged him tightly, burying her face in his shoulder for a moment longer than usual. "I can't wait to see it," she said softly. Dinner began like any other. Polite small talk, compliments about the meal. Loretta smiled, asked about school, chuckled at Tommy's dramatic retelling of a playground argument. But beneath her calm exterior, her heart pounded like a war drum. She noticed the way Meadow's eyes scanned the room, searching for cues, calculating responses. Loretta had spent years being underestimated by this woman. Tonight, that would change. After the plates were cleared and dessert was served, Loretta returned to the dining table with a fresh pot of tea. "Thank you for coming," she began, voice even. Meadow tilted her head. "Of course. We've missed you, haven't we?" Elliot nodded, wiping his mouth. "It's nice to be here again." Loretta smiled, then gestured to the envelope beside her. "There's something I'd like to talk about." A flicker crossed Meadow's face. Just a flicker. But Loretta saw it. She reached for Elliot's hand, as if bracing herself for what she already feared. Loretta met her gaze. "This isn't easy, but it's necessary. What I'm about to share isn't an accusation. It's the truth." Meadow's smile faltered. "Loretta?" "If this is about the birthday," Loretta raised a hand gently. "It's not." She slid the envelope forward. Elliot blinked. "What's that?" "Answers," Loretta said simply. Meadow stood suddenly, her chair scraping loudly across the hardwood. "This is insane," she hissed. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing." "Sit down," Margaret Loretta said, her voice sharp as ice. The name hung in the air like a dropped glass. Elliot froze. "Margaret," he repeated, confused. Loretta opened the envelope and spread the papers across the table. DNA results, photos, investigator reports, marriage certificates. Meadow, or Margaret, backed away. Her face drained of color. I tried to ignore it. Loretta said, her voice trembling with control. I tried to believe it was miscommunication, that I was just out of touch. But I wasn't. I was being removed from you, from this family, systematically, and now I know why. Elliot looked down at the documents, then up at his wife, the pieces falling into place in real time. "I didn't want this," Loretta continued. "I didn't go looking for this. But David came to me. And what he showed me?" She let the silence finish the sentence. Elliot's voice cracked. "Is it true?" Meadow didn't answer. Tommy's laughter echoed from the other room, oblivious, innocent. Loretta stood slowly. "The truth isn't meant to destroy us, Elliot. It's meant to free us. But what you do with it now is up to you. For a moment, no one moved. The room seemed suspended in a vacuum, as if the truth had knocked all the air out of it. The papers lay across the table like broken glass facts, too sharp to touch, too impossible to deny. Meadow Margaret stood frozen. Her practiced mask of grace was gone, replaced by panic. She looked at Loretta with the wide eyes of someone who had finally been seen. Elliot's voice shook. Is it true? Silence. Loretta watched her son, his face tight with disbelief, eyes darting between his mother and his wife, as if searching for the version of reality that hurt less. I loved you, he whispered to Meadow. I trusted you with everything. Meadow finally spoke. I never lied about loving you, but you lied about everything else. Elliot's snapped voice cracking. She stepped forward, pleading now. You were the only good thing in my life. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I didn't know how to fix it once it started. You let me raise a child believing he was mine. Elliot shouted, his voice raw. Tommy is yours, she argued, desperate. Maybe not by blood, but you're the only father he's ever known. You love him. He loves you. That's real. Loretta stepped in gently. Love doesn't erase truth, Margaret. It builds on it. Meadow turned to her, trembling. You don't understand. You never liked me. You always judged me. I didn't like what you did, Loretta replied, but I still hoped I was wrong. Elliot dropped into his chair, hands gripping the table like it was the only thing keeping him upright. His whole world had been rewritten in 20 minutes. I need to think, he muttered. You can't do this, Meadow said, voice rising again. Don't let her poison you against me. Don't throw away what we've built. Loretta stepped between them. He's not throwing anything away. He's reclaiming what's real. For a long beat, no one spoke. In the background, Tommy laughed again, completely unaware. And that was the tipping point. Elliot stood slowly. You need to leave, he said quietly. Meadow blinked. What, take the guest room tonight? In the morning we'll talk. But right now I need space. She opened her mouth to argue, but Loretta's look stopped her cold. Meadow left the room, steps shaky, her composure in ruins. The house fell silent except for the ticking clock and Loretta's quiet exhale. Elliot didn't cry. He didn't rage. He just stared ahead, eyes glazed over. Loretta sat beside him. I never wanted this, he said hollowly. I thought we had a good life. You wanted a good life? Loretta corrected softly. And you tried your best. That's never something to be ashamed of. He nodded slowly. She fooled me. She fooled all of us, Loretta said. But now we get to choose something better. Elliot looked at her. What happens to Tommy? Loretta reached for his hand. We love him. That doesn't change. But he's not mine. He's yours in every way that matters. They sat in silence. Outside, the night deepened, and inside, the illusion had shattered, but something new had begun. The following days unfolded slowly, like petals from a flower, unsure whether to bloom again. Elliot was quiet, methodical. He moved through the house like someone relearning how to exist. There were no fights, no screaming matches, just space, careful distance, and beneath it all the tremble of something being rebuilt. Meadow, or rather Margaret, left a week later. No dramatic exit, no suitcases slammed shut, just a short note left on the kitchen counter. I'm sorry. I hope one day you'll understand why I did what I did. Tell Tommy I love him. Elliot didn't say much when he found the note. He simply folded it and placed it in a drawer. Tommy didn't ask where his mom had gone. Children, even the most sensitive ones, often protect themselves through selective silence. He went to school, played with his toys, and asked Grandma Loretta for extra mashed potatoes. The first weekend after Meadow's departure, Elliot and Tommy came over for dinner. Loretta made her famous herb-roasted chicken, the one Elliot always requested when he was sick in college. As she watched him take his first bite, she noticed how tired he looked, but also lighter somehow. "Something smells amazing," Elliot said, forcing a smile. "It's not the food," Loretta replied. "It's the truth in the room." He nodded, slowly. "It's strange. It hurts, but I feel clearer than I have in years." Loretta set down the serving spoon and sat across from him. "You don't have to carry all this alone, Elliot." "You never did." For the first time, Elliot looked at her like a son searching for guidance, not as someone trying to protect a fragile status quo. And Loretta, for the first time in years, felt like his mother again. Tommy interrupted the moment by bouncing into the room with a drawing. "Grandma, look. It's us at the zoo. That's you next to the elephant." Loretta smiled, taking the picture in hand. "I love it. Especially how you gave me extra eyelashes." "That's because you're always blinking at me," he giggled. Elliot chuckled too, an unfamiliar but welcome sound. They spent the evening playing board games and reading bedtime stories. And when it was time to leave, Tommy hugged Loretta tighter than ever before. "I want to stay here forever," he whispered. Loretta kissed the top of his head. "You'll always have a place here, sweet boy." In the weeks that followed, routines began to form. Elliot returned to work, slowly arranging for flexible hours. He and Loretta shared pickups and drop-offs at school. David, Tommy's biological father, remained at a distance, respectful and cautious, but present. They started meeting once a week at a quiet cafe. Just Loretta and David, talking about co-parenting stability trauma and what it meant to protect a child without causing more pain. "It's complicated," David admitted one afternoon, stirring his coffee. "But I don't want to disappear again." "You shouldn't," Loretta said. "You're part of his story now. And stories deserve all their characters, even the messy ones." They smiled. Later that night, Elliot said something that made Loretta pause. "I think Tommy should keep our last name. Patterson. It's all he knows." Loretta considered it, then nodded. "But maybe we can make space for David, too." Elliot looked surprised, then relieved. For the first time, they weren't choosing sides. They were building something new together. There was a new rhythm now. It wasn't seamless. It wasn't easy. But it was honest. Elliot had moved back into the house he once shared with the Meadow, now Margaret. The walls no longer echoed with the tension of pretending. Tommy's laughter no longer felt like a cover for something darker. And Loretta? She no longer felt like a stranger in the life she helped build. David rented an apartment just 10 minutes away, not too close to disrupt, not too far to be forgotten. It was a perfect distance, close enough for bedtime stories, far enough for boundaries. Every Thursday, the new family unit met at Loretta's for dinner. Not every meal was filled with smiles. Sometimes there were awkward silences, sometimes conflicting schedules. But they were together, present, real. One Thursday, Emma drew a picture of all of them, Loretta, Elliot, Tommy, David, and herself standing under a rainbow. She titled it, "My Family." When she showed it to the table, no one corrected her. No one explained genetics or legal guardianship. They just admired the colors, the way she gave everyone matching hearts on their shirts. That was the beauty of starting over with truth. One evening, Loretta and David stood in the kitchen washing dishes while the kids watched cartoons and Elliot answered work emails from the couch. "You ever think," David said, "about how strange this all is?" "Every day," Loretta replied with a smile. "But strange isn't always bad." He nodded. "I spent so long thinking I lost everything. But maybe I just had to lose the lie first." Loretta glanced at him. "Sometimes what breaks us is what frees us." They shared a quiet laugh, the kind that only comes from surviving the storm. Later that night, as Elliot packed Tommy's school bag, he said something that took Loretta by surprise. "I talked to my lawyer today," he said softly. "The divorce is final. No drama. Just done." Loretta nodded, cautious. "And? How do you feel?" Elliot paused. "Strangely okay. Relieved, mostly. Like, I can breathe again." Tommy ran into the room with a plastic lightsaber, yelling, "I'm the galaxy's best Jedi." Loretta laughed. "You've always been strong with the Force, little one." David joined in from the hallway. "That's my boy." For a split second, Elliot and David exchanged glances in unspoken agreement between two men who both loved the same child, each in their own way. There was no competition, just shared purpose. That night, they took a photo together at Loretta's request. Everyone squeezed onto the couch. Tommy climbed onto David's shoulders. Emma nestled between Loretta and Elliot, one arm around her son, the other around the man who had unknowingly given her a grandson. The camera timer clicked. The photo wasn't perfect. Someone blinked. Someone's hair was messy. But it was real. They were a family. Maybe not conventional, maybe not simple, but whole in a way none of them expected. Weeks turned into months. Autumn gave way to winter. Loretta swapped her garden gloves for scarves and baking trays. The house no longer echoed with emptiness. Instead, it buzzed gently with Emma's footsteps, Tommy's stories, and Elliot's quiet laughter during Sunday dinners. There was healing, though it came slowly. Some nights Tommy still cried for his mother. Loretta would hold him close, whispering stories about stars and brave little foxes who found their way home even in the dark. Other nights he would say nothing at all, curling silently into Elliot's side. David had started joining for more dinners. At first he kept to the edge of the room. Now he helped slice the roast-filled water glasses and reminded Tommy to chew slowly. The family no longer needed a title. They just were. One snowy Sunday, Loretta brought out a scrapbook she'd been working on. "I thought we should have something real, something that doesn't disappear when someone signs a paper or changes their name." She opened the book. First page, a photo of baby Tommy sleeping on Elliot's chest. Second page, Emma's first drawing. Third, a screenshot of the DNA test cropped to include only the date and the caption. "Truth begins here." They flipped through pictures of birthdays, park visits, zoo trips, even that night of the first dinner, after everything fell apart. Each page held both memory and meaning. Wounds, yes, but also proof of recovery. Near the end was a page that said simply, "Family isn't who stays by blood, it's who stays by choice." Elliot touched the words and blinked away tears. "I used to think being a man meant protecting people from pain," he said softly. "Now I think it means walking with them through it." Loretta smiled. "You grew up more in the last 3 months than most do in 30 years. Emma peeked over the table. "Grandma." "What does this say?" she asked, pointing at the last page. Loretta lifted her granddaughter onto her lap and read aloud. "The love that stays doesn't need a name. It just needs a place to belong." Tommy clapped. "That's our house." They all laughed. Later that evening, as the snow thickened outside, Elliot stood at the window holding a cup of tea. "Do you think she'll come back?" he asked almost to himself. Loretta joined him. "Maybe. But if she does, she'll find something she can't break this time." Elliot turned to her. "What's that truth Loretta said simply? And truth has a way of holding everything else in place." As the kids played and the grown-ups shared leftover pie, Loretta looked around her home. It had been broken, rewritten, reimagined, and yet it was more real now than it had ever been. Not perfect, not easy, but chosen. And in that choice, in every meal, shared every bedtime story, Every quiet understanding between former strangers turned kin was the kind of love that doesn't just arrive, it stays.